Hi, I'm Shameez Patel Papathanasiou, author of fantasy novel The Last Feather, and I'll be reading an excerpt from the second book in the trilogy, The Eternal Shadow, which has been tweaked slightly to avoid any spoilers. The thick air of the forest burned like acid in his throat. He glanced around, locating everyone. "I'm going to walk," Lucas said, sliding off the horse and offering it to his mother, who looked to be dead on her feet. Every day that passed by recently seemed to age her by a year. "I'm fine, thank you, darling." "Cassia, you seem tired," his mother said. "Would you like to ride?" Cass chugged water and wiped her mouth with the back of her hand. "I'm fine, thank you." A fox scurried across his path and he looked up in time to see the glint of a spider web before him. He ducked underneath, but Zoe walked straight into it and took a few seconds to rub it off his skin. Beyond where they stood, only small slits of light peeked through the treetops. Lucas struggled to inhale, as if the oxygen in this forest was owned by the looming trees. Cass stumbled, and before she could hit the ground, he grabbed the back of her tunic and pulled her to her feet. Not the best save, but it did the job. "Something's wrong," Cass said, blinking rapidly. "I feel like I'm going to pass out." "You haven't slept." She mumbled, but he couldn't hear her. Neither could anyone else. They paused, leaning in to hear what she had to say, while the horses whirled around anxiously. "No," she said, widening her eyes in a way that she'd do when she was falling asleep in class. "I'm tired, but it's not from sleeplessness." With shaking hands, she took out the water skin and poured it onto her face. "I feel like I'm being sedated." She wrung her hands out, and as she closed her eyes, she shuddered in the way his mother did whenever she'd had a vision. Cass's eyes flung open. "What did you see?" his mother asked as she dismounted her horse. Bree slid off as well, her eyes full of concern. "The Lithilia. I keep seeing it," Cassia said, forcing her eyes wide open. Her voice shook with panic as she spoke. "It wants to know who I am." Ardal moved suddenly behind Lucas. He spun around to see Ardal grabbing the horse with Lucy on it and whispering to it. The horse broke into a gallop as soon as he released the reins. "What are you doing?" his mother asked. "Don't you hear that?" Ardal said, spinning around and unsheathing his knife. Nisa and Minjun slipped off their horse, and everyone listened. "Lithilia, Lithilia, Lithilia." The sound that had been described to him numerous times increased in volume from every direction, echoing and bouncing off trees. The shadows swirled from the depth of the forest, blocking out the silver's sunlight that had remained until they were all clouded in darkness. He felt the ice-cold, faceless thing wrap around his body. He felt it drip along his skin, and then he felt the pain. Before he screamed, he heard Nisa screaming, her voice breaking as the sound of her shriek tore through him. A white stream in the endless night connected Lucas to the shadow creature around him. Pain carved through him as his body felt as though it were being pulled apart. No, not pulled. Torn, slowly, tugging away at the glue that held him together. He couldn't move. Frozen in pain or terror, it was hard to distinguish between the two, as the darkest parts of him overwhelmed his entire being. Lucas pushed his hands forward, forcing his magic out with the intention of throwing the monster backward and creating space to get to his mother. But the shadows swallowed his magic, growing in size, multiplying. More of them appeared, seemingly out of thin air. He pulled out his dagger and rushed forward, diving it through the black entity and splitting it. But it simply rejoined. Two became one, and just as easily one became four. It didn't matter. His magic ached within him, threatening to break free. He considered giving into it, but he couldn't. He could feel it edging toward the surface, but something was stopping it. He ran to his mother, who scrambled to her feet, fighting them off with her dagger. On his far right, Cass collapsed, likely from exhaustion. The shadows wrapped around her before anyone could reach her. Lucas cut through them in an attempt to get to her. It lifted her off the ground as it had done with him, except There was no white stream of magic connecting them. It spoke, and this time they all heard it. "We found you," the thing said to her, its voice resonating as if it came from more places than just one. "Come with us." They lifted her up and up, to the tops of the trees, and Lucas grabbed the nearest trunk, preparing to climb. He pulled himself up a lower branch. He would climb up and reach her. He would jump. But seconds later, blue flames exploded from her body. The shadow disappeared in the light, and she was falling. He was low on energy, but it had to work. He raised his hands, summoning his telekinetic magic, and Cass froze midair. Before he could lower her, the hum of his magic dropped, and she fell. Thank you.